Delon had seduced half of Europe's most beautiful actresses without breaking a sweat. But when Nathalie walked onto their film set in 1963, she looked at France's most confident heartthrob and thought, "This one will be mine." What happened next would turn the hunter into the hunted and create the most legendary seduction in French cinema history. The morning sun cast golden light across the elegant Parisian film studio where their latest production was set to begin. Alain arrived with his characteristic confidence, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that emphasized his legendary good looks. At 28, he had already established himself as France's most magnetic leading man, possessing an almost supernatural ability to charm any woman who crossed his path. His romantic conquests read like a who's who of European beauty. Sophisticated actresses, international models, and aristocratic socialites had all fallen under his spell with remarkable consistency. The pattern was always the same: a few carefully chosen words, that devastating smile, and an irresistible combination of vulnerability and strength that made even the most independent women lose their composure entirely. What made Alain so effective was not just his physical beauty, though that was undeniable, but his psychological understanding of female desire. He possessed an intuitive grasp of exactly what each woman needed to hear. What combination of attention and mystery would make her feel both desired and challenged? It was a gift that had served him well throughout his rapidly ascending career. The film they were about to make together was a sophisticated drama that would showcase both actors at their most compelling, but Alain viewed the professional collaboration primarily as another opportunity to work his romantic magic on yet another beautiful co-star. It was a routine he had perfected through countless productions, and he saw no reason why this time would be any different. When Nathalie Barthélémy made her entrance, however, something shifted in the atmosphere that even the crew members could sense. She moved with a quality of self-possession that immediately commanded attention. Her beauty refined and intelligent rather than merely decorative. There was something in her eyes that suggested she possessed secrets that might be worth discovering. At 26, Nathalie had already carved out her own successful acting career, building a reputation for intelligence and professionalism that set her apart from the typical starlets who populated French cinema. She was known for her preparation, her insight into character psychology, and her ability to hold her own opposite, even the most dominant leading men. But what the industry did not know was that Nathalie had been studying Alain Delon's romantic patterns with the analytical precision of a military strategist preparing for battle. She had observed his techniques, analyzed his successes, and identified what she believed were the psychological weaknesses that could be exploited by someone who understood his methods better than he understood them himself. But what Alain didn't realize was that Nathalie had been studying his romantic patterns for months, preparing a seduction strategy that would use his own confidence against him. Her research had been thorough and methodical. Through mutual friends and industry colleagues, she had gathered detailed information about how Alain approached romantic conquest. She understood his preference for initial psychological distance followed by calculated vulnerability, his use of intellectual conversation to establish superiority, and his reliance on the assumption that women were essentially passive participants in romantic scenarios. What Nathalie had concluded from her analysis was that Alain's greatest strength, his absolute confidence in his own irresistibility, was also his most exploitable weakness. He had never encountered a woman who understood his techniques well enough to use them against him, and his success had made him complacent about the possibility of being outmaneuvered by someone more psychologically sophisticated. Her strategy was elegantly simple. She would appear to be exactly the kind of intelligent, challenging woman that typically attracted his interest, but she would control every aspect of their interaction while making him believe he was pursuing her. It was a plan that required perfect psychological timing and absolute confidence in her own abilities. The first test came during their initial script reading, when the director introduced them and left them alone to discuss their characters' relationship. This was typically the moment when Alain would begin his subtle campaign of charm, establishing the intellectual and emotional dynamic that would eventually lead to romantic conquest. Instead, Nathalie took control of the conversation immediately, asking penetrating questions about his character's psychology and offering insights that demonstrated her own analytical intelligence. She positioned herself as his intellectual equal while subtly challenging his interpretations, creating exactly the kind of stimulating opposition that had always intrigued him in women. But she was careful to season her challenges with just enough admiration for his previous work to avoid triggering his defensive instincts. Her comments were designed to make him feel both respected and slightly unsettled, unsure whether she was impressed by his reputation or secretly judging his abilities. As Nathalie began her calculated charm offensive, France's most notorious playboy was about to experience something he had never felt before, being genuinely outplayed by a woman. Their conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, far longer than necessary for simple script preparation. But Alain found himself reluctant to end an exchange that was proving more intellectually stimulating than any he had experienced with an actress in years. Nathalie's combination of beauty, intelligence, and subtle challenge created exactly the kind of mystery that his romantic instincts were programmed to pursue. What he did not realize was that every aspect of their interaction had been carefully orchestrated to produce exactly this response. Nathalie's questions, her timing, even her body language had been designed to intrigue him while maintaining enough emotional distance to make him want to bridge the gap between them. The sophistication of her approach was remarkable. She was playing the game at a level that Alain had never encountered before, using his own techniques with a precision that suggested she understood them better than he did. She was, in effect, seducing him with his own methods while making him believe he was the one doing the pursuing. When filming began the next morning, Alain arrived expecting to continue their professional relationship, but Nathalie's first move would leave him completely off balance. As they prepared for their first scene together, she approached him with what appeared to be a simple question about character motivation, but her delivery carried an undertone that made it clear she was operating on multiple levels simultaneously. "I was thinking about our character's dynamic," she said, positioning herself just close enough that he could catch her subtle perfume. "And I realized that what makes this relationship compelling is how two people can be attracted to each other while remaining completely in control of their own emotions." Her eyes met his with a directness that was both challenging and inviting, leaving him uncertain whether she was discussing fictional characters or making a statement about their real-life interaction. The brilliance of this opening move lay in its psychological complexity. She had managed to acknowledge the romantic tension between them while simultaneously asserting her emotional independence, creating exactly the kind of intellectual puzzle that Alain's mind was compelled to solve. She was, in effect, presenting herself as both available and unattainable, accessible yet mysteriously beyond his usual techniques. Throughout the morning's filming, Nathalie continued her campaign with surgical precision. During breaks between takes, she would engage him in conversations that were intellectually stimulating but emotionally neutral, treating him as a respected colleague rather than a potential romantic conquest. This departure from his usual experience with actresses, who typically either fawned over his reputation or maintained defensive distance, created a new dynamic that he found increasingly intriguing. Her performance during their romantic scenes was particularly masterful. She delivered her lines with authentic emotion while maintaining a quality of professional detachment that suggested she could access genuine feeling without being overwhelmed by it. This demonstration of emotional control was precisely the kind of strength that Alain found most attractive in women, but it was being presented in a way that challenged his assumption that he could eventually breach her defenses. The psychological warfare escalated during their lunch break, when Nathalie suggested they continue their character discussion at a nearby cafe. The invitation seemed perfectly innocent, two professionals refining their craft, but her choice of location and timing revealed her strategic thinking. For the first time in his career, Alain found himself thinking about a woman instead of his performance, and Nathalie knew she had him exactly where she wanted him. The cafe she had selected was intimate without being romantic, the kind of place where serious artistic conversations naturally occurred. This choice allowed her to maintain their interaction in the realm of professional collaboration while creating an atmosphere that would make any deepening of their connection seem organic rather than calculated. During their conversation, Nathalie employed a technique that demonstrated her sophisticated understanding of male psychology. She would focus intently on his insights about acting and character development, asking follow-up questions that made him feel intellectually validated, but she would occasionally allow her attention to drift slightly as if something in his analysis had triggered a private thought that she chose not to share. This pattern of engagement, followed by subtle withdrawal, created exactly the kind of emotional uncertainty that Alain's romantic instincts were programmed to resolve. She was making him feel both intellectually appreciated and mysteriously incomplete, generating the kind of psychological tension that typically preceded his most successful romantic campaigns. But what made her approach so effective was its apparent effortlessness. Unlike other women who had tried to challenge him through obvious game-playing or artificial mystique, Nathalie's behavior seemed entirely natural and unforced. She appeared to be simply being herself, an intelligent, confident woman who found him interesting but not overwhelming. The turning point came when she casually mentioned her evening plans, describing a gallery opening she planned to attend alone because she enjoyed the opportunity for solitary reflection among beautiful art. The invitation was never explicitly offered, but the way she described the event made it clear that she would welcome his company if he chose to join her. This indirect approach to extending an invitation demonstrated her understanding of how to make Alain feel, like he was pursuing her while she controlled the circumstances of their meeting. She had created an opportunity for him to suggest joining her without making it seem like she was seeking his attention. That evening, as Alain found himself standing in an art gallery discussing abstract expressionism with a woman who matched his intellectual sophistication while maintaining her emotional independence, he began to realize that he was experiencing something unprecedented in his romantic career. For the first time, he was genuinely uncertain about the outcome of a romantic pursuit. Nathalie's behavior throughout the evening continued to demonstrate her mastery of psychological timing. She would engage deeply with his observations about art and life, creating moments of genuine connection. But she would then shift her attention to other guests or artworks, leaving him with the subtle impression that her interest in him was genuine, but not exclusive. But what appeared to be Nathalie's complete victory was actually about to awaken something dangerous in Alain, the competitive instinct that had made him France's greatest actor. The gallery evening concluded with what seemed like Nathalie's perfect execution of her strategy. When Alain offered to drive her home, she accepted graciously but maintained the same quality of friendly professionalism that had characterized their entire interaction. She thanked him for an intellectually stimulating evening, mentioned how much she was enjoying their professional collaboration, and disappeared into her apartment building with a smile that was warm but not particularly intimate. Standing alone on the Paris street, Alain experienced something he had not felt in years: genuine romantic uncertainty. Every instinct told him that Nathalie was interested in him, but she had managed to express that interest without giving him any clear opening for escalation. She had, in effect, left him wanting more while providing no obvious path for obtaining it. If you love seeing brilliant minds at work in the game of seduction, subscribe to witness how this legendary romantic battle reached its shocking conclusion. The psychological impact of this evening would reverberate through the following days of filming. Alain found his attention divided between his professional obligations and his growing fascination with understanding exactly what Nathalie was thinking. Her strategy had succeeded in making him feel both pursued and pursuing, confident yet uncertain, in control yet somehow at her mercy. What he had not yet realized was that his temporary confusion was about to trigger the very competitive instincts that had made him France's most formidable romantic adversary. Nathalie's brilliant opening moves had awakened a sleeping giant who was about to demonstrate why his reputation for romantic invincibility had never been seriously challenged. Just when Nathalie thought she had won completely, Alain's eyes revealed something that made her heart skip a beat. He had figured out her game, and now he was ready to play. The recognition dawned gradually during their final scene of the day, a complex emotional sequence that required multiple takes to achieve the director's vision. With each repetition, she noticed subtle changes in how he looked at her, not with the previous confusion or fascination, but with the calculating appreciation of a professional examining another professional's technique. During the wrap party that evening, his behavior confirmed what she had begun to suspect. Instead of the slightly awkward attentiveness that had characterized his recent approach, he moved through the room with his old confidence, restored charming cast and crew members with effortless grace while treating her with the same warm professionalism he showed everyone else. The special attention she had grown accustomed to receiving had simply vanished. The psychological impact was immediate and unsettling. For weeks, she had operated from a position of control, carefully managing every interaction to maintain her advantage. Now she found herself analyzing his every word and gesture, searching for clues about his intentions and finding herself genuinely uncertain about what he was thinking. This sudden return to uncertainty triggered something she had not anticipated: genuine interest in him as a person rather than as a target for her strategic games. When he was pursuing her with obvious fascination, she had felt confident and superior. Now that he had withdrawn that attention, she discovered she actually missed the intellectual stimulation of their conversations and the challenge of matching wits with someone who understood psychological complexity. The reversal accelerated when filming resumed the following week. Where she had previously controlled their interactions by maintaining emotional distance while encouraging his pursuit, now she found herself initiating conversations that he received with pleasant but non-committal responses. He seemed genuinely interested in her observations about their scenes, but no more interested than he might be in any colleague's professional insights. More unsettling was his apparent fascination with other aspects of the production. He spent long conversations with the director about cinematic technique, engaged in philosophical discussions with the screenwriter about character motivation, and even showed genuine curiosity about the cinematographer's approach to lighting their romantic scenes. His attention, previously focused primarily on her, had expanded to encompass the entire artistic process. The moment Alain realized he was being played, everything changed. The master of seduction was about to show Nathalie what real romantic power looked like. His counter-strategy revealed itself through a series of seemingly innocent choices that cumulatively created a completely different dynamic between them. When she suggested they continue discussing their characters over dinner, he agreed enthusiastically but invited the director to join them, transforming what she had intended as an intimate evening into a professional consultation that lasted until midnight without a single moment of personal conversation. The brilliance of this response lay in its complete reasonableness. He was being collaborative, professional, and intellectually engaged, everything she had claimed to want from their working relationship. But by taking her at her word and treating their connection as purely artistic, he had stripped away all the romantic tension she had so carefully cultivated. Even more sophisticated was his approach to their romantic scenes. Previously, he had seemed slightly overwhelmed by the intensity of their fictional relationship, allowing some of that confusion to bleed into their real-life interactions. Now he delivered his lines with such professional competence that their love scenes felt exactly like what they were supposed to be. Two skilled actors collaborating to create convincing fiction. This demonstration of emotional control was particularly devastating because it mirrored her own previous strategy. She had maintained professional detachment while encouraging his emotional investment, and now he was doing precisely the same thing to her. The psychological positions had been reversed so completely that she barely recognized the dynamic she had originally established. The turning point came during a particularly challenging scene that required her to express vulnerable emotion while he remained mysteriously distant. His performance was so authentic and compelling that she found herself genuinely moved by his character's apparent indifference, and that authentic emotion carried over into her delivery in ways that surprised both of them. When the director called cut after what everyone recognized as their best take, Elaine's response was perfectly calculated to deepen her confusion. Instead of commenting on her performance or their chemistry, he immediately began discussing technical aspects of the shot with the camera operator, treating the emotional breakthrough she had just experienced as simply another professional accomplishment. But you haven't seen the most devastating part yet. How Alain used Nathalie's own strategy against her in the most brilliant romantic reversal in cinema history. The psychological warfare escalated when he began employing what could only be described as strategic kindness. He would remember details from their conversations and follow up with thoughtful questions. But these gestures felt like the considerate behavior of a good colleague rather than the focused attention of a romantic pursuer. He brought her coffee exactly as she liked it, but he brought coffee for several other cast members as well, making the gesture feel inclusive rather than special. Most effectively, he started treating her exactly as she had originally treated him, with intellectual respect, professional warmth, and emotional availability that stopped just short of romantic invitation. Every technique she had used to maintain control while encouraging pursuit was reflected back to her with the precision of someone who had studied her methods carefully and learned to apply them with devastating effectiveness. The cumulative effect of these subtle reversals was to make her feel like she was chasing someone who was perpetually just out of reach, interested but not invested, available but not pursuing. It was the emotional position she had maneuvered him into during the early weeks of their collaboration, and experiencing it from the other side gave her new appreciation for the psychological sophistication of what he was doing. Stories like this prove that true masters never stay down for long. Don't miss the incredible conclusion to this battle of hearts and minds. By the end of the week, she found herself in the unprecedented position of hoping for his attention while being uncertain how to obtain it. Her previous confidence had been replaced by the kind of romantic uncertainty she had been trying to generate in him. and she discovered that being the pursuer rather than the pursued required completely different emotional resources. The final demonstration of his psychological mastery came when she attempted to regain control through a direct conversation about their relationship. His response was so perfectly calibrated to deflect her approach while maintaining plausible innocence that she realized she was dealing with someone who understood romantic strategy at a level that exceeded even her own sophisticated preparation. When Alain implemented his counter-seduction strategy, what happened to Nathalie would prove that even the most confident women can fall victim to genuine French charm. The transformation was not immediate but gradual, like watching ice slowly melt under warm sunlight. Each day brought new evidence that her carefully constructed emotional defenses were crumbling under the sustained pressure of his psychological mastery. The decisive moment came during their final week of filming, when the script required them to shoot the movie's most emotionally complex scene, a sequence where their characters finally acknowledged their love while knowing they could never be together. The irony was not lost on either of them that they would be performing fictional heartbreak while navigating their own very real romantic complications. As they prepared for the scene, Alain's behavior carried none of the uncertainty that had marked his earlier interactions with her. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had regained complete control of the situation, discussing technical details with the director while treating her with the same professional warmth he showed everyone else. But there was something in his occasional glances that suggested deeper currents running beneath this surface calm. When the cameras rolled, what emerged was a performance of such authentic emotion that even the experienced crew fell silent. Alain delivered his dialogue with a combination of passion and restraint that made every word feel like a personal confession. His character's declaration of love carried such genuine feeling that Nathalie found herself responding not as an actress playing a role, but as a woman hearing something she desperately wanted to believe. The scene required multiple takes to capture all the coverage the director needed, and with each repetition, the line between performance and reality became increasingly blurred. Alain's fictional emotions seemed to be accessing something deeply real, and Nathalie discovered that her own responses were becoming less calculated and more authentic with every take. What started as Nathalie's calculated seduction became her complete emotional surrender as Alain demonstrated why he remained France's most legendary romantic figure. When filming wrapped that afternoon, the usual celebratory atmosphere was subdued by the emotional intensity of what everyone had just witnessed. Cast and crew members spoke in hushed tones about the power of the performances they had captured, but Nathalie barely heard their compliments. Her attention was entirely focused on Alain, who was collecting his belongings with the same casual efficiency he brought to every end-of-day routine. The moment that changed everything came when he approached her as she was gathering her own things. Instead of the elaborate romantic gesture she might have expected from someone who had just delivered such an emotionally charged performance, he simply said, "Would you like to have dinner tonight?" Just the two of us, no scripts or characters, just Alain and Nathalie. The directness of his invitation was devastating in its simplicity. After weeks of psychological complexity and strategic maneuvering, he had stripped away all pretense and offered her exactly what she had been secretly hoping for: authentic connection without games or calculations. The vulnerability required to make such a straightforward request revealed more genuine feeling than all their previous sophisticated exchanges combined. During dinner that evening, she experienced the full force of his romantic authenticity unleashed. Where their previous conversations had been intellectual sparring matches with hidden agendas, now he spoke with the open honesty of someone who had decided to abandon strategy in favor of genuine emotion. He told her about his early struggles as an actor, his insecurities about being taken seriously despite his success, and his growing realization that their professional collaboration had awakened feelings he had not expected to experience. Most powerfully, he acknowledged the game they had been playing with a combination of admiration and gentle humor. "You almost had me completely confused," he said with a smile that carried no resentment. "I spent weeks trying to figure out what you were thinking, until I realized that maybe the most honest response was to stop thinking and start feeling." This admission of vulnerability, coming from someone who had just demonstrated such sophisticated psychological control, created exactly the kind of authentic moment that she had been unconsciously seeking throughout their entire interaction. He was offering her something more valuable than romantic conquest. He was offering genuine emotional truth. But the most incredible part was how this battle of wits transformed into genuine love, proving that even the greatest games can lead to real emotions. The evening concluded not with dramatic declarations or elaborate seductions, but with the quiet recognition that something fundamental had shifted between them. When he walked her to her apartment, the conversation continued naturally, neither of them wanting to end an exchange that felt more honest than anything they had shared during their weeks of strategic maneuvering. The kiss that followed was inevitable but unhurried, carrying the weight of genuine feeling rather than tactical advantage. After weeks of psychological complexity, they had finally reached the simplicity of authentic attraction, and the relief of abandoning their respective strategies created space for emotions that neither had fully anticipated. Their courtship over the following months became a revelation of how much deeper connection could be when stripped of manipulation and game-playing. Alain's romantic attention, no longer filtered through strategic considerations, proved to be devastatingly effective in its straightforward sincerity. He courted her with the focused intensity of someone who had found what he genuinely wanted, and her response was the complete emotional surrender of someone who had finally encountered authentic feeling. The marriage proposal came during a quiet evening at his apartment, delivered with the same directness that had characterized his ultimate romantic strategy. "I want to marry you," he said simply. "Not because of anything we've performed or calculated, but because I cannot imagine my life making sense without you in it." The certainty in his voice made it clear that he had moved far, beyond romantic conquest into something much more profound and lasting. Their wedding 6 months later became legendary not just for its celebrity guest list, but for the obvious authenticity of emotion between bride and groom. Industry observers who had witnessed their entire courtship recognized that they were seeing something rare. Two people who had found genuine love through a process that had tested every aspect of their emotional sophistication. Years later, when journalists asked about the secret to their successful marriage, Alain would smile and say, "The best strategy is to stop strategizing and start being honest about what you actually want." For a man who had built his reputation on romantic mastery, it was the ultimate victory, discovering that authentic feeling was more powerful than any technique he had ever learned. Alain Delon's ultimate victory proved that true romantic mastery cannot be defeated by mere strategy. It can only be matched by genuine feeling. Did this legendary battle of hearts inspire your admiration for timeless French romance? Subscribe for more incredible tales of love, seduction, and ultimate triumph. If you believe that authentic charm always wins in the end, hit that like button.